Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Wanted, Dead or Alive, by excusxme. After taking Akainu's hit for his brother, Ace was sure that it was the end. That was until he woke up buried underground, in a coffin. After finding out 2 years have passed since his death, Ace goes in search of answers, trying to unwrap what has happened in the 2 years he was gone. Adios.
Fate must really despise Ace. Bad luck stalked the man, similar to the way animals stalk their prey before killing them off. Why was Ace thinking this though? He wasn't a lucky man. After all, the word luck isn't a word many people would say to explain a situation such as being thrown off the roof of a coliseum by an imaginary voice in your head. Not only that, but now he was waking up to a sweaty, obviously panicking man carrying him on his back. Not the way Ace had expected or preferred to have been woken up to. That is, he wasn't expecting to wake up at all. Before he had time to frantically check the should-be wounds on the back of his head, the running figure halted in his tracks, clearly searching for something in the ocean. In front of them, a slight sigh escaping his lips as he search failed. Thinking this was the best time to escape, Ace slowly leaned back, doing his best not to alert the carrier of his aching body that he was awake, before the said carrier turned his face round to face Ace. Ace had to blink multiple times to make sure what he was seeing wasn't an illusion, his pupils widening within seconds. Suddenly a gush of wind blew his words away as the Vista look-alike suddenly ran into a deserted corner, throwing Ace off the carrier's back and onto the floor harshly, causing his aching pains to peak again, his mouth scowling. Vista, what? Seeing that he was again back on solid ground, Ace immediately reached up to check the wounds on his head, preparing for the pain to soar down his neck. Instead, he raised his eyebrows, gripping the back of his head harder to make sure what he was feeling wasn't his head becoming numb. That wasn't right. It had felt fine, perhaps even better than it did before he had fallen. Turning his hand into his fist, clenching his fingers, Ace's eyes glazed over in thought. That's impossible though. Wasn't there blood pouring from my HEA? Ace? No way. That can't be you. Words suddenly broke Ace from his thought, the said ex-commander peering his eyes up to the stuttering man before him. Guilt passing through him as he saw the pained look of his old friend's eyes. Deciding it would be best to fill the silence, Ace shook his head, weakly smiling as he stuttered out his words. Vista, is that really you? Immediately as those words were said, Vista rushed over to Ace, throwing his arms around the freckled ones as his body began to shake. It's a miracle. Surprised, Ace screamed a little, unable to breathe due to the swordsman grip around his body. Air Vista. I need to breathe. The guilt hardly faltering with those words, Ace furrowed his eyebrows, inwardly agreeing with the mustached man's statement. Bringing a tissue to his face, Vista cleared up his eyes, before throwing the said tissue at Ace's face. How are you even alive? You died in front of all of us. There was no way you could survive a hit like that. Does this have to do with you not being in your grave? But that's impossible. Someone stole you from there. Flinging the sodden tissue away, Ace turned to Vista with widened eyes. Getting up from where he was sat. You were at my grave? When? Vista went silent, his arms beginning to shake. Vista? Ace questioned again. Seeming to ignore the freckled man's question, Vista's eyes shadowed, his thoughts obviously plaguing the conversation they were having. That can mean only one thing. Confused, Ace moved closer, reaching out to the now silent swordsman. What do you mean, one thing? Finally moving from the spot he was glued to, he slowly unsheathed his sword, picking up the pace of his feet as he shouted towards Ace. I hope that somewhere, up there in the heavens, you can hear me, Ace. I won't let anyone control your body like this, you bastard. Ace blankly stared at him, repeating in his head what his companion just said. What? Barely moving inches away from Vista's attack and out of his thoughts, Ace quickly leapt to the side, gulping as he stared at the wall behind him sliced in half, then inwardly shitting himself as he peered over to receive the furious glare which Vista was throwing him. His mouth suddenly becoming dry, Ace stared with his pupils enlarged, barely uttering out two extremely accustomed words from his mouth, "Oh shit." Swinging his sword once more, Vista blatantly ignored all the signs of civilization, crushing the houses and stalls around him, causing for people surrounding the area including Ace to scream and run to safer places. "YUS. You'll die for what you've done." Peering his head around his shoulder, Ace ran rapidly down the center of the street, grinding his teeth as he came to a halt, deciding in trying to calm down his fired-up brother. "V Vista. Shit." Another attack pin pointed towards Ace, the ground shattering in front of him as he ducked once more into another shadowed street. "You have to calm down. I know it seems completely impossible, but it's really M." Still though, Vista ran towards Ace, ignoring all attempts at conversation as the swung the sword at Ace's neck. Wind gushing behind him as his sight was filled with the street without his target. Turning around in the opposite direction, he spotted the man rushing into a house, flinging the door behind him shut. Kicking open the door without struggle, Vista sprinted up the stairs, slightly growling at the returned sight of his half-dead brother standing by an open window. Seeing the place as a dead end, Ace gulped, turning around to face the unpleasant sight of his enraged brother, bringing up his hands once more as he took a step back. "Vista, it's me, Ace, your brother." Looking to see no recognition of accepting that fact on Vista's face, the fire thrower twitched, clenching his fingers into a fist as he continued to shout back at his brother. "I have proof." Ace began to awkwardly laugh, bringing his hand behind his head as sent the man a half-hearted smile. "Do you remember that time when your top hat went mysteriously missing and turned up in your cabin with it dyed pink and fake bunny ears attached did? Well, it was me. Isn't that funny? There's no way that anyone else knows about that incident, so how about you stop attacking me now?" Vista continued to stare dangerously at Ace, causing the said fire thrower to inwardly sweat drop. "Okay. So maybe that didn't help the situation. Not only do you steal his appearance," finally muttering out words, Ace brought all his attention to his brother, eyes narrowing at the threatening tone he was using. "But to steal his memories as well." Vista started to shake once more, bringing his sword closer to the fire user, holding it horizontally towards him. "You will never be forgiven." Twitching, Ace brought up his fist hesitantly, not wanting to fight back against his brother. "I already told you, Vista, it's not like yelling interrupted his words, as the floor below him suddenly shattered from another one of Vista's sudden attacks, causing him to jump back, completely forgetting about the open window behind him. Shit. Falling from the window with shock, Ace crashed down onto a building below, easily breaking through the ceiling and down into a hole, which was placed in the building itself, before crashing into someone below. Haruta stared at Sabo with narrowed eyes, her senses peaking every time a sound was echoed around her. Easily noticing the commander's uneasiness, Sabo raised an eyebrow, ushering the waitress dressed in clothes representing a bumblebee to another table. "Is there something that's bothering you?" he asked bluntly, causing the said commander to twitch and send her gaze somewhere else. "How can you not recognize it?" Haruta's sight peered over to the place where everyone in the restaurant was staring at, their faces mortified with shock. Smirking as he too glanced over to the site, he laughed, flinging his hand up in the air with his fingers straightened. "Have you never seen a hole before?" Twitching again, Haruta turned to face the smirking man, grumbly. "Of course I have." Placing her elbow on the table, she held her chin in her palm. "Just not in a place like this. Don't act like it's not weird." Bringing his hand down, Sabo nodded, keeping silent as he brought the cup placed in front of him to his mouth, slowly sipping its contents and placing it back down. "I admit, I am curious on how such a hole got there in the first place, but you've got to stop staring at it like that. Your face might stay that way." Jolting from her spot, she inwardly hissed at the man, grumbling more under her breath as she saw him smirk once more. Yeah. Bringing her other hand up, she waved it in the air, trying best to steer the conversation. "Anyway, I've been wanting to ask you this the whole time, but why have you brought me here?" Tilting his head at such a question, Sabo blinked, sending a grin at Haruta. "For something to eat." Eyes slightly widening from the idiocy of the blonde, she slipped her chin from her palm, banging her head harshly on the table. "TCH," followed by a sigh passing her lips as she held her head. "I know that. But why do you want something to eat?" And don't you dare say because you were hungry." A chuckle suddenly split from the blonde's mouth, causing Haruta to raise an eyebrow. "Why, do you have a problem with the food? I hear they serve fantastic lemon soufflés here," he said, his stomach grumbling loudly. Haruta continued to stare at the man with a displeased look, making Sabo smile. Bringing his hands up in the air, he tilted his head, sending Haruta a small smile. "Would you believe me if I said that I just wanted the good company of someone whilst I eat?" Instantly grabbing the fork placed by her and throwing it towards the blonde's head, she sent him an irritated look, a threatening glaze directed at the blonde. "Don't think I'm an easy pushover for your words, Sabo. Tell me honestly why you brought me here." Bringing his hand out of sight and instantly in front of his face, Sabo's smile faltered, gently placing the fork down onto the table once more. Silence suddenly balancing between the two. Haruta kept her gaze at the man, not twitching once at either movements he did. Sighing, Sabo leaned forward, whispering out his words, "Because Haruta, both of us have a common goal in mind." Leaning back slightly, Haruta narrowed her eyes, listening intensely to the man's words. "A common goal?" His smile growing wider at the other's acknowledgement, Sabo lifted up a newspaper which was placed by his side, putting it less than gently onto the table. "You're a crewmate of Portgas d'Ace, correct?" Twitching at the mention of his name, she sadly gazed down to the newspaper placed in front of her, biting her lip as she thought how to answer the question. "What of it?" "Then you would agree that this whole competition for his devil fruit is repulsive and something that must be stopped, no matter what." Sabo immediately responded, his face suddenly becoming shadowed from the light. Startled by the sudden question, she continued to stare at the newspaper with widened eyes, easily noticing the emotion the man was showing before her. Swallowing her words down, she faintly nodded, her eyes becoming glazed once more as she thought of the events which had happened recently. Shaking her head out of her thoughts, she turned her look away from the newspaper and onto Sabo, curiosity edging in her voice. "Why would you care about that though?" The blonde remained silent, it being the first time since she met the man, slightly unnerving Haruta as she looked on. Twitching again, she banged the table harshly with her hands, ignoring how loud she was being as she startled Sabo from his thoughts. "I'm guessing that you want some kind of help from me, correct? So you can at least tell me why you want to do whatever it is you're planning to do." Staring at her with empty eyes, he smiled ever so slightly, nodding. "If you want to know," he ushered silently, mirroring Haruto's actions earlier by placing his chin in his palm, his eyes directed at the newspaper. "The reason is purely personal. For I can't stand by and let my brother's devil fruit to be taken away as easily as that." Silence. Piecing together each word, Haruta stared at the man with huge pupils, stuttering out her words. Wait. Holding her hands in front of her, allowing for her previously threatening position disappear, she gaped at the man. "Hold up a second, did you just say?" Nodding once more, Sabo looked up from the newspaper, forcing a smile. "Ace, he's my brother." "Are you feeling okay? You're not looking so good." Haruta? Barely stuttering out her words, Haruta blinked a few times, before screaming aloud, "Eh?" and once again banging her head onto the table. Smirking, Sabo laughed weakly at her actions, nodding his head as he sighed out his words. "I don't get why so many people react like that when I tell them." "Why, you're nothing alike," Haruta bellowed, once again ignoring all signs of quieting down as she brought her head up from the table. "You really expect me to believe a stranger I met in the middle of nowhere to be Ace's brother?" "Ah." Sabo pointed his finger up, causing Haruta to lean back further, but still capture her attention. "You're wrong there. This isn't just the middle of nowhere now, is it?" Haruta blinked, her eyes saddening at the recognition of his words, her head slowly nodding. "And that is why I want you to help them." Puru, huh? Haruta jumped from her seat, alerted by the familiar noise which came from the blonde's pocket. Raising an eyebrow, the blonde sighed with irritation. "Well then," Sabo said with a grin, clapping both his hands together as he stood up from his seat. "It is a shame to be leaving you this soon, Miss Haruta, but I must go." Blinking, Haruta just stared at the man blankly, her eyebrows twitching once more at the man's declaration. "What?" Putting the transponder snail on silent, he slid another object out of his pocket, placing it in front of Haruta. It seems my colleague has finally wondered where I have run off to. Staring at the item he placed onto the table, he turned his head away. Please do try your best to be at the right place and the right time. I'll be counting on you. Sending Haruto a smirk before she could question once more, he turned away towards the exit, leaving Haruto staring at the item in shock. Did he just, her eyes shadowing, she gripped hardly on the edges below the table, flinging the table high into the air, alerting the other customers, as she bellowed towards the exit. That idiot. He seriously thinks he can just leave me here like this? Leaving the wreckage behind her, she stormed her way towards the door, fuming by the ears as she ignored all the shouts and warnings around her. Suddenly, she collided with something that was falling above, sending her and the thing into the direction of the hole and down underground. Cursing as she hit the floor with a crack, she whipped her head round to see that thing that she collided with, halting at the sight. Gasping, she stuttered, her heart undoubtedly missing a beat as she stared into the eyes of an old friend's face, tears immediately swelling up in her eyes. Ace, Koala was angry. Maybe angry was an understatement. Fuming would be the correct word to use to describe her feelings towards her partner right now. Staring with fury at the smiling blonde, she instantly grabbed a hold of the edges of the knives placed by her side, swiftly throwing them at the man with a pout placed upon her lips, ignoring the fact that they were both placed on rooftops. Yelping in surprise at the girl's sudden actions, Sabo ducked from the directions the knives were thrown. What was that for? He asked with a twitch of sarcasm hidden in his voice, causing the girl to once again grab the other set of knives by her side and threaten to throw them at Sabo. The man simply laughed at this, slowly getting up from where he was laying as he brushed himself off. Letting go of the tips of the knives, Koala placed her hands on her hips, her eyes twitching slightly. "And where the hell have you been?" she asked, somehow answering the question which Sabo had previously asked. "Unlike you," he started, his smile faltering slightly. "I've been doing my job." Pouting, Koala turned away from the man, facing towards the Colosseum. "I would have been doing my job if you hadn't idiotically wandered off back when we were on our way to do our real task." Flinging his hand up to his chin, Sabo sent Koala a smirk. "Excuses. You." Koala puffed her cheeks out. After a few seconds of blatantly staring at the man with anger, she finally sighed, letting her hands fall off of her hips and onto the backside of her pockets. "While you were gone, I was able to get the identities of who seems to be on the island right now, but thanks to a situation," she sent a glare at Sabo once again. "I wasn't able to verify all the identities for myself." Pulling out a mid-sized notebook, she lifted up one of the pages, before glancing at Sabo with a more peaceful look. "I also found out something else." With a rip of a page, she scrunched the paper in her hand with her fingers, swiftly letting go of the crumpled piece into the street below. "You'll never what I saw today. I couldn't really believe it myself. It seems that someone who looks like you're—" Sabo quickly finished off her sentence, taking the notebook out of her hands and scanning the pages. "I know. I've already seen his ship dock before it left." Koala's eyes pondered at this, ignoring the rude actions the blonde just exhibited. "It left?" Sighing, he passed the notebook back to Koala, placing his palm on top of his head. "I have no idea what Luffy could be up to. All I know is that he's here now, and I have a 99% suspicion where he's going to be." Taking a hold of the notebook placed in her hands, Koala turned fully around, a suspicious grin slowly creeping across her face. "Oh," she whispered, though easily made it loud enough for the other to hear. "I didn't know you were talking about Luffy." She hushed out, causing the blonde behind her to raise an eyebrow. "And who else would it be?" Sabo questioned, his eyes narrowing at the other's behavior. He knew easily from experience that whenever Koala showed the following signs on her face, that something mischievous was going to happen. And that always meant that she had something on him, something that he didn't know. Skipping forward on the tiles of the house they were standing on, she sent a smile back at Sabo, before halting in her steps. "If you were on the job, you would have known." Catching up to where the girl was now standing, Sabo frowned, readjusting the gloves which were slipping due to the girl's previous attack. "I was busy getting to know Ace's old crewmates, seeing as that might just help in our job, no?" he hissed out, over-empathizing the help in his words. Koala continued to stare at the man with a blank face, before sticking her tongue out, placing her foot outwards to the street below, She leapt up the other foot as she fell from the rooftop, uttering out words with amusement. Excuses. Staring into the empty space in which the girl was previously standing, Sabo sighed, a small smile crawling upon his lips before he too jumped down onto the ground, leaving a small note to flutter in the wind behind. Unknown to him, written on the note was the following scribed words, a question mark placed next to it. Fire Fist Ace. Robin looked warily at the small creatures, which were placed on top of her, wincing at the tiny hands which pulled vigorously at her hair. Uttering out a small, ow, from her lips, she furrowed her eyebrows, asking the creatures with curiosity and caution in her tone, "Where on earth is this?" Letting her eyes slowly start to observe her surroundings, she wouldn't have been surprised if someone had walked up to her and explained that she was dreaming. Her surroundings were ones that were similar to ones that were used in children's stories, the small creatures included. Glancing to the left of her, she was met with the alerted creatures, all pointing their weapons towards her. Ignoring them for now, she chose to glance to the right, seeing nothing but small wooden houses, assuming the creatures lived there. Honestly, it was quite a sight to see. Peeking back to the creature which stood on top of her, she watched him grow pale, stuttering out his words. Don't try to run." Seeing that Robin chose not to respond, the creature looked proud of himself, before this time proclaiming more louder and bolder. "You should sit still. You're a bad, great human, aren't you?" With those words, something seemed to click inside her mind. Gnomes. Of course. She muttered to herself, slightly disappointed she wasn't able to recognize them sooner. The scenery looks exactly like what the novels had said, along with the creatures matching the appearance she'd heard about. Biting down on her lip, her mind wandered off to how she had gotten herself here, knowing well that gnomes weren't welcoming to humans, especially in their countries. Hearing a shuffling above, Robin's heartbeat rose slightly, feeling a strong aura beckoning from the sound. Unable to look behind her, she glanced down to the oblivious gnomes, simply staring at her with fury. Before she was able to voice her warning, the aura left, leaving her laying there with her curiosity piqued. Throwing it off as her imagination playing tricks, she continued to observe the area. Taking her away from her thoughts, a familiar-looking gnome spoke up, his looks being more chubbier than the others. "Everyone watch out. This great human, she uses magic. Back then, her hands sprouted like flowers right below my feet." Gasps from the fellow gnomes were voiced, causing Robin to inwardly sigh. If the flowers hadn't set off, then I wouldn't have stood a chance. Confused, Robin raised an eyebrow. "Flowers?" she asked, before her memory cleared, remembering how she discovered the chubby gnome, then faintly hearing Usopp scream. A slight frown edging down her face, she wondered how Usopp was, seeing as he too was affected by the flower's tranquilizer. Deciding that the long-nosed man would be fine for now, she instead asked questions surrounding on where this place was, to which the gnomes surprisingly responded with ease. "This is our country, the Tontata Kingdom," the gnome on top of her proclaimed, before threatening Robin's movements once more. "It's no use to try and move, for I have done the honors of sewing you to the ground with my Nui magic." Testing out the magic power for herself, Robin tried to swiftly bring up her arm, but was left motionless, only hearing the laughter of the proud gnomes around her. Her mind wandered back to her previous companion, inwardly gulping as she thought of what Usopp would do if he was in the same position. Deciding that he could be in danger if she didn't move, Robin brought out her softer voice, staring the main gnome square in the eye. "I'm sorry. I was just interested in you. I didn't mean to hurt any of you at all. If you let me go, you have my promise I will not tell a soul that I saw you," she whispered out, before a frustrated yell also hit the air. He stepped forward, placing his weapon towards her neck, as if you would get away with such a pathetic excuse. Glancing her eyes down to the sword below, she bit her lip. Suddenly, a shout from afar caught everyone's attention, most importantly Robin's. "You're wrong. She's telling the truth," a high-pitched voice called out, running up to the main gnome placed above her. As if someone had just hit the clapperboard to this conversation, all of the gnomes immediately lowered their defenses, walking over to the previously shouting gnome. "Well, if that's true, then there's no problem," the main gnome exclaimed, causing Robin to stare at him with widened eyes. Sending her a smile, all the gnomes around her started to laugh joyfully, some even falling on the ground, Undoing the spell, the main gnome disappeared around the corner, before returning with Robin's glasses in hand. "Sorry about that. Here's your glasses," he said with a cheerful tone, leaving Robin to slowly sit up, hesitantly taking a hold of her glasses. One thought crossed her mind as she gripped the glasses in hand, her own eyes shadowing slightly. How can they trust so easily? Hazily watching as the gnomes walked around, going about their daily business. Robin couldn't help but feel a slight jealously rage up inside her, placing her palm over her head as she breathed out heavily. The jealousy instantly lifted, her mind crossing the images of her placed beside her crew, her captain, her friends. Smiling at the thought, she nearly missed the smaller gnome patting her arm below, asking her if she was all right. Nodding slowly in response, she leaned her hands onto the floor, bringing herself off the grassy ground. Almost instantly as she got her bearings, a tremor hit the floor, causing everything in the area surrounding her to shake. The gnomes yelled with fright, some exclaiming such tremors have never happened before. Leaning her weight on a smaller tree to her side, she was able to balance herself and gaze towards where the tremors were coming from. The ground was still slightly shaking, but seemed to cease when Robin came across a duo of cloaked figures groaning, muttering countless things under their breaths. My, she found herself saying, a small smile stretching across her lips. It looks like this day just got a little more interesting. "Hey Ace?" Haruta accidentally yelled, causing the said person to turn around. Ace stood there, mouth agape as he tried his hardest to find words to stop the younger, not now at least, from crying. But before he could say anything, Haruta had already began to sob. Holding her hand over her mouth, she stared at him, her pupils shaking with disbelief as tears swept through them, falling onto the ground below. As Haruta began to mumble a mixture of unknown words, Ace continued to stand there, his whole expression dumbfounded. "Aren't you going to say something?" Ace instantly twitched. Oh no, he did not want to see that thing, not right now at least. "Shut it." Ace mumbled under his breath to the voice, easily forgetting he was the only one to see or hear it. Jumping from her mumbles, Haruta blinked through her tears to stare at him with what seemed like wider eyes, as she let out a little stutter, huh. Immediately regretting his previous words, Ace paled, holding his hands in front of him as he shook his head, also seeming to stutter in his words. "And no, not you." Haruta just blinked again, her face completely blank. "Not me." Silence edged the area at the bottom of the hole, both Haruta and Ace staring at each other with blank faces, both unable to speak any words. Of course though, this didn't seem to apply to the voice. Quit acting like an idiot and say something already. As pissed as he was with that thing, Ace decided to take its advice. Lowering his hands, he began to speak, his eyes becoming shadowed as he looked down to the floor. "Haruta, I'm so sore." Before he could finish his sentence, Haruta instantly ran up to Ace, tackling him in as she threw her arms around his body. "Don't," she yelled, her voice muffled by the cloth and her tears. "Don't say it." Feeling water sink into his chest, Ace simply stared with surprise at his sister. Was she not mad at him? Oyaji, he was dead because of him. If he hadn't acted on ridiculous impulse, then maybe their father would still be alive today. All the people who were killed at Marineford would still be living. They didn't deserve to die that day, not for someone like him. Continuing to stare at the younger, she carried on crying, before looking up to face Ace. You idiot," she yelled, suddenly kicking him harshly into chest, making him fly into the wall opposite both of them with a crash. Not expecting this, Ace dazedly sat up from the debris of the used-to-be wall he crashed into, shouting back at Haruta. "What the hell was that for?" "Hey!" The voice gave a laugh, leaning its body weight against a boulder. Suspiciously, a glare was sent towards the figure. Taking Ace out of his thought was however the steaming Haruta, her fists clenched as she marched up to the freckled man, grabbing his collar so they were eye to eye. "Never," she mumbled, before her eyes narrowed, letting a tear slip from her eye. "Don't ever try something like that again. You hear me, Ace?" She yelled the last bit, biting her lip as more tears fell from her eyes. Blinking a few times, Ace looked down, the pained look in his eyes fading as a smile tore across his lips. "I promise," he whispered out. The grip on his collar becoming weaker, Ace looked up to see a tear-filled Haruta staring at him in the face, snot peeking out of her nose. Wiping her tears with the other hand, she too smiled, yanking her arm around Ace's neck. Both Haruta and Ace sat there for what seemed like hours, the younger finally starting to dry her tears while Ace just held her. Slowly moving away from his sister's grip, Ace's eyes started to widen, his mind trying to remind him, as if he had forgotten something important. "Ace?" Haruta questioned, letting her arms fall down to her knees. "What's wrong?" Standing up from where he was sat, Ace crossed his arms over his chest, mumbling countless words from his lips. "I don't know. I feel like I was doing something really important before I fell down here." Blinking, the time for all the obvious questions seemed to peak in Haruta's mind. "Ace!" she screamed, dragging her feet off the ground. "Wait a minute, H, how are you even alive?" She only now asks this, the voice asked, humor written in its tone. Ignoring the voice's comments, Ace looked over to Haruta. Bringing his hand to the side of his head, the freckled man grinned guiltily at the other. "Yeah, about that." Staring with widened eyes at Ace, Haruta tilted her head slightly, not completely liking the grin that Ace was sending her. "I have no idea," Ace stated bluntly, causing Haruta to collapse back onto the ground, her hands flailing in the air. Instantly standing up from where she fell, she marched over to Ace, grabbing a hold of the collar of his cloak. "What do you mean you have no idea?" Stepping back a few steps from the fellow imposing commander, Ace yelped, his grin slightly faltering. "Well." Taking a place next to Ace, the voice taunted him, a shit-eating grin appearing on its face. "You should see your face right now." Glancing with hatred spun in his eyes at the voice, Ace sighed, closing his eyes. Haruta took this as a sign to let go of the fire thrower's cloak, her eyes still staring with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity as the fabric fell to Ace's sides. Peeking one eye open, Ace started to speak. "I don't know a lot." Smirking, Haruta snorted, lowering her posture. "Well, nothing's changed there." Twitching, Ace continued on. "I can't remember much after." His tone faltering, Haruta nodded, understanding what he meant. "Just a lot of darkness. After that, I woke up underground, my wounds healed." Leaning beside the voice on a boulder, Ace scowled slightly. "That's about all the clues I've got about it." Frowning slightly as well, Haruta placed one hand on her hip, her mind trying to think of any possibility how that would help. Letting out all the breaths she had been holding, Haruta straightened her lips before shaking her head. "There's not really much we can go off then, can we?" she asked Ace, already knowing the answer. "Nope." Ace grumbled, leaning further onto the boulder. Looking at the boulder her brother was leaning on, Haruta's eyebrow raised suddenly, her eyes starting to scan the area they were in. "Well," she swallowed, her mouth becoming dry. "Would you at least happen to know where we are?" As soon as the words left her lips, a sudden rumble hit the air, the ground starting to move along with it. Ace stared blankly at Haruta, ignoring the sounds and shakes of the world around him as terror started to appear on his face. "Shit. I forgot about him." Haruta yelped, flinging herself onto the boulder Ace was on. "Him?" she yelled, trying to make her voice louder than the rumble itself. As if on cue, a shattering crash blasted next to them, the shadow of the extremely pissed-off Vista flying down for the sky above and onto the floor next to them, causing Haruta to tilt her head. "Vista? Oh, he found you." His instincts flaring up, Ace mumbled closely to the voice under his breath. "Thanks for that input. I wouldn't have known if you didn't tell me." "Huh?" the voice sounded, surprise uttering his tone. "So you finally quit sulking and decided to talk to me again?" Completely forgetting the fact that there was a homicidal commander in front of him, Ace turned around to face the voice with a pissed-off glare. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I should become best buddies with a thing that throws people randomly off places." Pouting, the voice turned away, its arms crossed over its chest. "Not my fault," it muttered childishly, causing Ace to twitch once more, giving Ace time to think of the many attacks he had planned on killing the thing in his head. But before he had time to do anything, Haruta yelled at him, grabbing a hold of his shoulder, bringing him back to the situation. "Ace, as much as I can tolerate your weird habits, including the newest one being coming back to life, right now it would really help if you would stop talking to yourself." Turning his glare towards Vista, it instantly dropped, gulping as he slowly turned his head towards Haruta. "It looks like Vista's changed over the past 2 years." He's not usually like that. Haruto replied, her grip on Ace's shoulder tightening. What the hell did you do to him? Putting both his hands in front of him, Ace shook his head, his eyes widened. What? I haven't done anything. TCH. Haruto spat out, sighing once more. Like I believe that. Letting go of Ace's shoulder, she hesitantly stepped forwards, bringing both her hands out in front of her. Vista. I don't know what Ace has done to you, but listen to me, you need to calm down. Vista quickly interrupted, bringing his sword down from where it was previously hanging. Haruto, step away from that man, he's not Ace. Timidly taking a step back, Haruto shook her head. No, Vista, it's Ace. I'm sure of it. Hearing this, Ace's eyes softened slightly, the guilt which had disappeared before slowly appearing. Back at the island, you never went to his grave, did you? Haruto continued, but her words widened Ace's eyes. They went there? The voice questioned, surprise in its tone. The island? Ace questioned, breaking his fellow commanders out of their conversation. Though neither of them decided to return his question, Haruto continuing on with her statement, taking Vista's silence as an answer. What none of us told you guys was the condition Ace's grave was in. A few seconds of silence passed, causing the fire thrower to think on the words his sister had just proclaimed. Inwardly slapping himself, Ace bit his lip, uttering out a silent, "Oh," from his lips. Sensing that the freckled man had done something stupid, the voice's eyes widened, stuttering slightly. Don't tell me you were stupid enough to leave it open?" the voice asked, slowly turning its head up towards the said man. Hearing its words, Ace looked down towards the still leaning voice, his eyebrow raising. "You weren't there?" Jumping with realization at the other's question, the voice turned away, its posture more telling than its words. "I can't remember." Deciding to ignore it for now, he returned his interest back to Haruto and Vista, surprised to see that Vista was returning his surprised gaze back at him. Watching as Vista stumbled over his steps towards Ace, the swordsman's voice once again wobbled. "Hey Ace, is that really as you?" Inwardly jolting at the sound of desperation in his brother's voice, Ace gave Vista a peaceful smile, tilting his head slightly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you, you crazy idiot," he replied with a chuckle, Vista himself grinning at the name as he breathed out, relaxing all his muscles. "I must be one to be called that by you of all people," Vista replied, collapsing on a nearby broken wall, his eyes slowly shutting. Grinning at his brother's actions, Ace let out a small laugh, taking a seat next to Vista as he looked up to Haruto, his eyes narrowing. "What's wrong?" Haruto stood in front of her sitting brothers, a scowl placed on her face as she looked around. "Vista, where the hell have you thrown us?" Before Ace could question how Haruto knew it was Vista that threw him, he gulped, his eyes as well stumbling over his surroundings. As far as he could tell, the place they were in was completely deserted, much like the town he had visited previously. There were shattered pieces of debris smothered everywhere, plenty of ruins of previous completely obliterated, leaving nothing but the dust they were standing in. The only light source was the sky above, which Ace guessed was the light from the building this hole was placed in. This of course raised an entirely new question. What was a hole this huge doing in a building like that? Ace asked, raising his hand up to the sky above. Haruto pondered, before shaking her head. "No idea. It was already there before I arrived in the place. Pretty weird thing to have in a restaurant if you ask me." Both Ace and Vista tuned in at this, their stomachs on K starting to rumble, causing Haruto to sigh wholeheartedly. Vista looked to the side, a slight red tinted on his face before he looked back up to Haruto questionably. "What were you doing in a restaurant?" Looking to the side, Haruto avoided her brother's eyes, not wanting to speak about her previous run through the town. The freckled man smirked. "Ah, is it something you're embarrassed about, Kuang?" Ace winked at Haruto, Vista quickly joining in with the laughter. Fuming, Haruto both instantly whacked the two on the head as her eyes began to glare dangerously at the duo. "Of course not. Someone was asking a favor off me, that's all," she grumbled, crossing her hands over her chest. Vista snickered at this, causing Haruto to once again kick the swordsman in the head, throwing him off into the distance. However, as she did this, her eyes widened, suddenly checking all pockets on her as she started to yell. "Damn it, where is it?" Ace watched as the girl fumbled around, laughing as she started to curse more. "What's wrong now?" Instantly turning her head towards Ace, she scowled, sighing as she gave up on finding the object. "Someone gave something important to me, but it looks like I lost it in the fall," she muttered, shaking her shoulder-length hair out of her eyes. Raising an eyebrow, Ace placed his arm on his knee. "Sorry about that." He grinned, before his eyes once again searched the place. What did it look like? Haruta obviously pondered about this, her eyes wincing as she tried to remember the shape of the object. "I think it was a piece of paper." "That sounds easily defined." Vista once again joined in, sarcasm edging his tone. Twitching, Haruta glared towards the swordsman, giving all signs to him that he should shut it. "Well, I wouldn't have lost it if you hadn't gone on a little goose chase with Freckles over there." Ignoring the bickering of the duo, Ace narrowed his eyes, getting up from where he was sat to a random space out in the abandoned street. Leaning over to pick something up, he brought the item up, looking towards Haruta. "Is this it?" he yelled, catching the attention of the fuming girl. Her eyes suddenly shined, running over to where Ace was standing along with Vista. That's it." All six eyes drew their attention to what Ace had in hand, the freckled man furrowing his eyebrows as he hesitantly opened the piece of paper. Surprised by the simplicity of the paper's contents, all their eyes widened. In front of them was a map of Dressrosa, a huge circle placed over the Colosseum's hidden tunnels. Written in neat handwriting, a small arrow was placed near the circle, a clear message inscribed. 12 p.m. The game starts. Curiously walking over to where the two mumbling duo had fell, Robin immediately recognized one of the scowling faces that looked up at her. "So nice of you to join us, Mr. Swordsman," she said with a graceful smile, chuckling slightly as she saw the surprise on the man's face. "Robin," he coughed out, flattened by another object on top of him. Bending down, Robin faced Zoro at an eye-to-eye level, her eyebrow ever so slightly rising as she looked at the object on top of him. She quickly motioned to it, to which Zoro quickly scowled. "Get the damn thing off me," he yelled, not particularly at Robin, shaking the object off him, it crashing onto the ground. "You bastard! How dare you throw me like that?" The object screamed back, causing Robin to stand back up from where she was kneeling, her eyebrows furrowing at the peculiar-looking man before her. Instantly getting off the ground, Zoro twitched, brushing himself off and also turning towards the flattened man. "Bastard," he mumbled under his breath, causing Robin to look slightly surprised. The man hadn't spoken like that for years, seemingly having a more calm and serious approach towards things now. Obviously this man had done something towards Zoro, making the archaeologist curiously look at the man on top of Zoro. As she did, the peculiar man stepped up, pointing dramatically at the swordsman. "You idiot, I told you to take a left, not to crash through the tunnel ahead of us." Robin once again chuckled at this, slowly glancing at the swordsman. "It seems that you still have your amazing talent of getting lost, Zoro." The man jumped at this, looking with widened eyes at the woman before grumbling countless words under his breath. Robin's gaze returned back to the man, her face completely emotionless once more. "It seems I have yet to meet you." She left a gap, leaving the man to continue on. The man didn't mind this at all, a truly horrifying grin to curve onto his lips as he dramatically turned around, placing his hand onto his head. "I thought that you would never ask, for it is me." Stepping back slightly, Robin chose not to stand near the strange man, concluding that the gnomes seemed safer than him. I am known across all seas as the frightening leader of the Pirate Dispatch Society. Yelling high into the skies, the man danced across the small space of the gnomes' village, scaring some of them to say the least, before pointing his hand into the sky. "It is me, Buggy the Clown." Glancing over to the swordsman, he too wore an unimpressed look on his face, motioning for them both to leave the man posing by himself. "Eh?" Buggy himself asked, seeing that there was no one but small creatures staring at him with widened eyes. Yelping in terror at the creatures, he turned around, seeing the two straw hats walking off, reaching out his hand to them. Wait for me." Luffy peered down to Bellamy's back, excitement passing through his veins. After he had talked to the man, Luffy had taken a liking to him, despite the bad blood they previously shed. He really wanted him to win. It had been some time since he defeated him back in Jaya. He was now curious to see how much stronger the man had become. Briefly ignoring the events that had preceded, the rubber teen bounced, grinning a little wider with each contestant being revealed. However, all hopes for Bellamy to win suddenly halted, as a familiar sight hit the arena below. His grin instantly faltering, Luffy became still. His eyes passed over to see the person who had crushed his excitement, a frown slightly appearing on his lips. Standing a few meters away from Bellamy, was the Whitebeard captain, looking as displeased as Luffy. The teen grumbled, itching to place his hat over his eyes as he sulked at the new events. He wanted Bellamy to win. No matter how much stronger he had thought Bellamy had become, he inwardly knew that the human spring wouldn't stand a chance. Not to someone like him anyway. Sighing, Luffy looked down to his hands. His eyes started to glaze over, attacked by thoughts of how he was going to win to the Whitebeard captain returning to mind. Pouting, Luffy suddenly hit his head, yelling at himself with frustration. All this thinking, I'm not usually this thoughtful. I don't know how the others do it all the time. Except Zoro. He's an exception. Luffy rambled on, his smile slightly returning. Hearing the fights below suddenly starting, Luffy quietened down, edging further towards the rail. It didn't take long for the others below to realize they had no chance against the Whitebeard captain, all looking slightly shaken that he was even taking part in the competition. Though of course, there were the eager ones, which despite seeing the signs not to piss the blonde off, decided to do that exact thing. The big muscled chain guy, as Luffy decided to call him, was the first to attack the blue and white striped captain, instantly bringing up the enormous spiked ball attached to the chain wrapped around him. Big muscle guy threw the said object unhesitantly towards the frowning blonde, a smirk appearing across his lips as he saw the man frozen in place. Though, unexpectedly to the audience and big muscle man, the ball never reached the captain. Instead, the blonde was directly above the ball, faster than anyone including Luffy would have expected. Lifting his leg without ease, the Whitebeard captain simply touched the tip of the ball with his foot. Suddenly, a gushing aura hit the air instantly, sending countless of the other contestants backwards or fighting to stay afoot. Luffy's pupils widened considerably, tensing as he heard a crack sound from the giant spiked ball, his mouth becoming agape as it snapped in two. Silence. Nobody spoke a word, all eyes staring directly at the two perfectly cut remains from the ball. The captain himself lightly landed on the ground, his eyes shadowed. Luffy slowly glanced over to Bellamy, not shocked by the amount of fright placed on the man's face. Holding himself back from cheering Bellamy on, he looked back to the Whitebeard captain. To his surprise, Marco was looking directly at him, sending him a stare which simply told Luffy that he wasn't messing around. Taking a deep breath, Luffy stared back at the blonde with emotionless features, knowing too well that this man was strong. Right. He whispered out, his gaze not leaving the blonde once. Suddenly, a grin ushered across the youngster's face, causing the Whitebeard captain to raise an eyebrow. Letting a small laugh escape his lips, Luffy continued on. I understand. I'll go all out as well. Hearing this, the blonde closed his eyes, allowing for the contestants to regain their breaths and prepare their attacks. I'm glad, Yoi. Zoro wasn't exactly comfortable about his current situation. Peering over to where his long-nosed companion sat, he inwardly sighed. He saw the man talking alongside little men, as he told them of his many adventures. Honestly, the man's lies were getting more ridiculous by the day. A slight giggle could be heard to the left of him, causing him to gaze over to the said giggler. He frowned slightly when he saw it was Robin, for he knows she could clearly see what he was thinking. With that thought, Zoro smirked slightly, leaning further into the tree stump as he closed his eye. Perhaps this situation wasn't so bad. After all, he had finally gotten Shisui back by his side, and as far as he knew, all his crew members were safe and out of harm's way, which for this crew was rare. What the hell are those? Maybe not. Twitching at the sound of that clown's voice, Zoro inwardly shivered, thinking back to their encounter on the first island him and Luffy visited. You there, what the hell do you think you're doing? The same voice screeched towards Zoro. A sudden stabbing of a fingertip pinging on the swordsman's forehead. Gradually opening his eye to face the clown, Zoro sent one of his most deadly glares, causing the said clown to yelp and run towards Robin. You don't have to be so unsociable, Swordsman-san. He's only saying, hello, Robin commented, smirking at the whole situation she had found herself in. Buggy fidgeted, sulking in the opposite corner in the room. Why does TS street stuff always happen to me? He mumbled under his breath. First it was Straw Hat's brother, no now this. This instantly caught the attention of the two listening Straw Hats, Robin loosing her smirk. Luffy's brother? She questioned, causing Zoro to scowl. Mentioning anything along the lines of brother or ace seemed to be a taboo on the ship, everyone wincing when Marineford is even mentioned. Hearing it out here now, it brought back the many unwanted memories of 2 years ago to the swordsman, and in this current moment, he felt the sudden urge to kill the clown for mentioning the words, but didn't, due to Robin's threatening hand placed on his shoulder. Jumping at her response, Buggy instantly grew back his ego, laughing disgustingly to the side as he loudly started to proclaim. "Ah, has that little comment caught your interests?" Prancing up to Robin, he stuck his head close towards hers, trying his best to give a threatening aura. "Well, I'm afraid I won't talk unless I get something in return." Remaining emotionless, Robin blinked. "Oh, and what would that be?" Stepping backwards, Buggy was surprised by the sudden cooperation, horridly smirking towards both her and the swordsman. "Have your captain bow down to me, and then I might be willing to answer your questions." Robin remained silent, before looking towards Zoro with a pleasant smile on her face. Raising his eyebrow, Zoro confusedly glanced back at Robin, before her grip on his shoulder suddenly became light. "Swordsman-san, I apologize for holding you back this long." Liking the look of what Robin was suggesting, Zoro started to smirk back towards the clown, twitching to grab a hold of one of his swords. "Would you do the honor?" "Gladly," Zoro stated, his tone tinted with amusement. Smiling broadly, Zoro reached down to grasp the tips of his swords, causing the clown to suddenly yelp once more in fright. What are you doing?" he questioned, backing away slightly from the duo. Robin simply continued to smile towards the man, before letting out a cheerful statement. "We would be happy to oblige, but don't you think it's best if you were to simply tell us now? After all, we wouldn't want anything to accidentally happen to you while we search for our captain, right?" Her words oozing with threat, Robin smirked, causing Buggy to gulp. "Why, you know what? Only because I feel like a change of heart. I'll tell you. Don't worry about that captain business," Buggy replied, nearly collapsing from fright. Hearing this, Zoro frowned, childishly putting back the sword he had half drawn out. Once again, Robin laughed, causing the clown to step back. "You kind of you." Sighing, Buggy sat down onto the floor, crossing over his legs and his arms with a pout. "I was attacked by the ghost of Straw Hat's brother back in Lorenco Island not too far from here." Not expecting such a strange comment coming from the man, both Robin and Zoro stared with surprise and curiosity. "Attacked?" Robin questioned, her eyes slightly widened. Nodding, Buggy continued on. "He was hooded and everything." He dramatized this by throwing his hands into the air, causing the duo to both inwardly sigh. He demanded to know where Straw Hat was. "And?" Zoro asked, trying to hide his interest in the clown's words. Sighing, Buggy brought his hands down from the sky with a thud, closing his eyes while he continued to nod. "So I told him." He then asked if there were any ships nearby, and since there was none but mine. Buggy quietened at the end, leaving a gush of wind to simply sweep by the three. Both Robin and Zoro stayed quiet, already knowing what the clown was implying. Clenching his fists, Zoro frowned, his eye narrowing towards the ground. It was impossible, it had to be. He, along with everyone else, had seen the newspapers, had discussed with witnesses what had happened during the war. And all had said that Luffy's brother had died, protecting the younger from being hit. He doubted Luffy wouldn't have brought it up either. The kid couldn't keep something that serious to himself. So, the only possible explanation was that the clown before him was lying. But from taking one glance at the shaking clown, that idea was slowly becoming less believable. "So, you brought Captain San's brother." Robin herself twitched at her words, knowing well what she was saying couldn't possibly be true. "Here." Whispering out the last words, Zoro looked eagerly towards the clown for answers, scowling even more once he saw the slight nod of his head. Hearing a sigh sounded next to him, the swordsman glanced up to the equally frowning woman, questioning her actions. Standing there with her hand brought towards her chin, Robin's pupils glazed over. Closing her eyes for a split of a second, she seemed to come to an agreement in her mind, ushering for the swordsman to stand up. Very well then. We better get searching for him. Astonished by Robin's decision, both Zoro and Buggy stared at her with widened eyes. It looks like it's not going to be as peaceful exchange as we had hoped for Swordsman-san. Short chapter, long note. And no Ace, I know. It's terrible. 3. Even if you don't normally read the note, read it just this once? First, let's get the replies for the reviews out the way. Aqua Empress. Good guess S. But you'll just have to wait to find out winking face, and it's amazing. I don't know if they sell it outside of the UK, but that's my oblivious mind talking. I haven't had that in years, and yup the fight. Well, read down in the note, and I'm Kindasher but not certain you'll be happy. Thanks for your review. Girl of Darkness 10. Thanks, yup. D. Well, 2 of them anyway. Here's your next chapter, I hope you enjoyed it. Guest. Ah, thanks, and I have updated again. Quite quick this time. Muaha. D. You'll just have to find out. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. XX Wolves in the Night XXX. I don't know whether to be happy cause that means I'm not going crazy or to be scared. Because if the One Piece stories goes down D. We need to do something about it. Fist pumps the air me too. Even though I found it funny to write. And I can't tell you that laughing face. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Robin Lynn Spade. Yay, sorry, you'll just have to find out. I doubt Ace would care if people thought he was crazy. He doesn't seem like that kind of guy. No problem. Thanks for your amazingly long reviews. I could reply for ages, but if I did, it would probably go on for 1,000 words. So don't worry about it, and the hints are hardly visible. I just had to say that the voice was someone, cause I mean like that laughing face. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Scattered Philosopher. His waking up will be explained in better detail later. For now I don't want to go into a huge speech cause a lot of stuff needs to happen. And nah. I hardly made it visible that the voice was someone. Love Buggy as well. Hence why I used him. He's one of my favorite baddies ever. I'm glad you loved it, and I hope you like this one too. Sasimiura. Yup, Buggy's here, no problem, and I hope you enjoy this chapter as well. Collapses. I'm going to try to be quick with this, but you might have seen above, Marco vs Luffy will not soon at all. So instead of rushing the fight along, I'm going to give you guys a taster. So here it is. His heart was racing, his eyes were racing, he was racing. The man before was inhumanly fast, though Luffy knew he should have known better. After all, he Ace's crewmate. It had taken only 2 hits for the rubber boy to feel deflated, beaten even. Though he knew that couldn't let be the ending result. He couldn't lose to something like this, not again. Everything he had worked for the past 2 years. If he were to lose Ace's devil fruit despite his strength now. All of it. All of the training and promises, all of it would have been for nothing. Clenching his fists together, he shook his head, clearing all his mind from thoughts as he concentrated on the breathless man he was supposed to be fighting. The blonde strained to keep his eyes open, regret easily visible in his pupils. Raising his hand, it once again sparked into the deadly flames which had defeated countless men that day. Luffy stepped back slightly, he too raising his hand towards his lips, letting out a deep breath. I don't care whour. Luffy loudly proclaimed, causing the audience around to go silent. But I'm not leaving this island. Digging his heels into the ground below, the teen gritted his teeth, his eyes slowly glancing over to the enclosed fruit. Without Ace's fruit, the blonde looked stunned, his previous half-lidded eyes widened. A smirk suddenly crawling across his lips. The flames which previously surrounded his arms slowly began to dance across his chest, his body posture gradually turning into his unique fighting stance. Bring it on. He whispered out, spitting out his last words with curiosity peaked in his tone. Straw Hat. As unique as this situation was to Vista, he still couldn't completely come to terms with it. Ace was alive. There wasn't any other explanation he could now come up with as to how he was seeing his alive and should be dead brother acting as he would back then, back before Marineford, before everything. Seeing him like that, he would be lying as he said some part of him still wasn't freaking out. It unnerved him, it was like nothing had changed. Despite believing Haruta's words, the swordsman still had his doubts. He'd seen Ace fall from the Colosseum, had seen the blood pouring from his head. If Akainu's attack hadn't killed him, that definitely should have. He couldn't just buy into his revival as simple as that, he wouldn't let himself. Yes, for now, he would just observe. Ace, looking over to where the said ex-commander was standing. Vista slightly smiled. Placing a hand over his head, he gradually made his way over to his siblings, a strained sigh escaping his lips. Though he couldn't help the happiness that filled him, seeing his family happy again. "And what," Vista started, closing the silence which hung among them, "are you supposed to do with that?" Hearing these words, Haruta began to shuffle, her words filled with confusion. "I only met the guy who gave this to me today, he just told me he needed my help." "Needed your help? For what? And who even was this guy anyway?" Ace asked, crossing his arms. Taking a place next to Ace, Vista grumbled, his head still turning from the situation he found himself in. "Whoa, calm down with all the questions there." Staring at the ex-commander, Haruta's eyes seemed to widen, an important thought crossing over her mind. "Wait, Sabo?" she whispered to herself, though was instantly thankful her brother didn't hear it. Looking away from Ace, she shook her head. He never said. Raising his eyebrows at his sister's sudden hesitance, Ace blinked. "He never said?" he bluntly stated, making the girl jump from her spot. "Ask her what she said again." The voice sudden perked up, its tone shocked. "She's hiding something." Ace twitched, glaring towards the voice's figure. "You really are going to keep pointing out obvious things, aren't you?" Surprised that Ace actually replied, the voice smirked, slowly crossing its arms across each other. "You know, if you weren't such an idiot I might have been willing to tell you what I thought she said." Finishing its words with a hushed tone, a glazed look passed through the voice's eyes, sadness filling them. Blinking the estranged look away, it smirked, sticking out its tongue slightly. "I don't wanna." Scowling, Ace childishly turned away from the voice's sight, mumbling out a mixture of insults. "Brat. What did you just call me?" Turning his face towards the noise, Ace found Haruta staring a few centimeters away from his nose appeared. A pissed-off glare uttering her eyes. Inwardly gulping from his sister's glare, Ace instantly rethought over his previous words, his face paling slightly. No, I didn't mean you." Flinging his palms up in front of him, he sent Haruta his most convincing smile, sighing with relief as she backed away. Despite the timid and feeble appearance his sister gave to people, Ace knew better. One rule in the crew was to not piss Haruta off, no matter what situation you're in. Unfortunately, he had to learn that the hard way. Inwardly shivering from the thought, Ace returned his stare back to Haruta, an idea popping up in his mind. So, he started, causing Vista, who was previously relaxing, to tune in as well. "Instead of just moping around here, why don't we check out that circled place on the map?" Seeing the confused stares that his siblings sent him, he continued on, an embarrassed smile crossing his lips. "Well, it's been a while since I've been on anything remotely, mission Y." Immediately, both commanders' sweat dropped, an unamused look passing through their eyes. "With you guys? Not to mention it sounds like this guy needs our help," he stated with a cheery tune in his tone, causing Haruta and Vista to go silent. Blinking, Haruta's mouth slowly became agape, her eyes widening slightly. "I think that's a very bad idea." Of course she would think that. The voice pitched in, though its words were faded with anger. Sending the voice a confused and seemingly worried stare, Ace narrowed his eyebrows. "What's up with you?" he questioned, causing the voice to simply look away. "Great, now he's talking to himself again," Haruta shouted to the sky above, an equally confused Vista silently nodding to her words. Twitching, Ace looked back towards the two, his joyful smile returning as he remembered his previous statement. "How can it be a bad idea? Where's your sense of adventure?" Taunting out the last word with a tint of amusement, Ace smirked, a chuckle escaping his lips as he saw Haruta pout. "I think we may need to be going there anyway," Vista interrupted, letting out another sigh. "After all, Marco's there right now fighting for your fruit." Sending Ace a regretful glare at the word, "You're," the ex-commander paled, his eyes widening at the swordsman's statement. "What?" Haruta exclaimed, bringing his fists up to her chest. "When the hell did this happen?" Glancing over to Haruta for a second, Vista closed his eyes. Stepping up from where he was previously leaning, the top-hatted man pondered, his eyes opening as his stare returned to Ace. He entered the tournament after discovering your fruit was the prize. It happened just after he left the ship. And you didn't stop him? How was I supposed to? At the time, it seemed right. Heck, I was even wondering if I wanted to join him, Vista replied, a slightly irritated look passing through his features. After all, I've known that idiot long enough to know that he wasn't going to change his mind, no matter what I would have said. Finding no words to reply with, Haruta gazed down, hesitantly biting her lip. Standing against the boulder speechless, Ace's eyes shadowed over slightly, his hands slowly hovering over his back. Gradually grabbing a hold of an item covered by his cloak, a familiar orange-bedded hat appeared, grabbing the attention of the fellow two people in the area. Bringing the object down onto his head, Ace's eyes peered towards the ground above, a scowl appearing on his features. So, how do we get out of here? Blinking out of her daze, Haruta joined Ace with her gaze towards the sky, a sigh escaping her lips. Well, I'm no scientist, but I'm pretty sure gravity won't let us go out that way. Noting her words, Ace nodded, his stare falling onto the hidden walls around them. Smirking, Ace flicked the top of his hat, glancing at the two commanders behind him. Well, I've got an idea. No, Haruta bluntly stated. What, you haven't even heard it yet? Interrupting his words, Haruta placed both her hands on her hips, her eyebrows slightly narrowing. I don't need to hear it to know that it's going to be a stupid idea. Placing a hand on his chest, Ace sent Haruta an amused smirk. Ouch, that hurts. Well, we might as well hear him out. Vista butted in, making the fire thrower's smirk even wider. Don't go on his Sid. Before Haruta could finish her words, a sudden flickering noise echoed the room, one that was quickly found to be coming from the ex-commander's arm. Bringing his feet off of the ground, Ace started to walk towards the tips of the hidden walls, a grin permanently placed on his lips. Letting his fingers crackle with fire, he examined the wall for a short amount of time, before flinging his arms slightly backwards. Yup, here will do. Raising an eyebrow at his actions, Haruta suspiciously called out to him, not liking the familiar posture he was getting into. Ace, what are you doing? Flaring the tips of his fingers to his shoulder with flames, the ex-commander flung his hand into the air, slamming it harshly into the center of the wall. Silence echoed the area instantly, the only movement coming from the two other occupants, their eyes wide-eyedly. A bellowing sound hit the air, both Haruta and Vista's eyes widening considerably more as they watched a gigantic crack form in the center of the wall. Unfortunately though, it didn't stop there, for gradually, the sky above shifted, causing Ace to bring back his hand from the wall and utter an "oh" from his lips. Ace! Haruta screamed at the top of her voice, stumbling back slightly as she watched the familiar boulders crumble down from the sky. What the hell were you trying to do? The voice exclaimed with fear, its words stumbling over each other. Standing there in silence, Ace continued to stare above. Hesitantly pointing above, Ace whispered, gulping in his words, "Not that." Bringing Ace out of his thought, Vista shouted to him from the field of boulders, "Run, you idiot." Following Vista's words, Ace pelted from where he was previously standing, paling as glanced back to the avalanche of debris falling behind him. Oh shit, that's not what I had in mind. Did you really think that you could escape through a hole in the wall? The voice commented next to him, trying its best to keep up with Ace's running. Gritting his teeth together, Ace pointed at the voice's face, a pissed-off glare directed at the others. I didn't see you come up with a better plan. Any plan is better than this plan, you idiotic pirate. My name is Ace. ACE. Like hell I'm calling you that. Ace. Duck inside there, a different voice called out to him, the fire thrower instantly recognizing it as Vista. Glancing towards the commander, he saw the man point towards an area in front of him, a terrified look in his eyes. Ignoring the look for now, Ace searched the area in which Vista was pointing to, relieved to see an opening carved into the hidden wall. Speeding up his already desperate steps, Ace reached the opening, though was immediately clouded by dust escaping from the debris. Blinded, Ace stumbled back, his steps crossing over each other as he fell against rugged wall behind. Deafened by the sounds of the avalanche passing by, Ace covered his ears, waiting endlessly for the sound to falter. Gradually, the sounds disappeared, leaving behind an echoed silence surrounding the area Ace had now found himself in. Hesitantly opening his eyes, Ace stirred, the air catching his breath dryly as he coughed, trying to clear his mouth from the dust. "Where the hell?" he mumbled out, his eyes clearing slightly. "Am I?" Blinking a few times, Ace brought his hand up to his eyebrows, his pupils widening slightly. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." He had been buried alive, again. And why the hell? An irritating voice hit the air, causing the swordsman trudging in front to suddenly growl. "Are we searching for Straw Hat's brother?" Deciding that the green-haired man would not suit best to respond, Robin glanced behind her, a bland look uttering her features. "You didn't have to come along, Clown-san. We would have been easily content if you were to have stayed back at the gnome's village." Sending the clown an innocent smile, the said man grumbled, childishly looking to the side. "I have some business with the man anyway. Don't think I'm coming along with you because I want to." Mumbling the words under his breath, Buggy pouted, annoyed at the silent responses he was receiving. "Didn't you hear me? I said I wasn't coming along, Bekau." "Oh, believe me." A different voice spat out, Zoro swiftly turning around to face the clown with a glare. "We heard you." Gripping the handles of his swords tightly, Zoro narrowed his eye towards the now quivering clown, slightly displeased when a familiar hand reached out to his shoulder. Glancing over to the owner of the hand, Zoro hesitantly let go of his swords, sending the clown one last pissed glare before continuing their walk through the tunneled-out corridors that lay beneath Dressrosa. Silence hung awkwardly between the trio, the only noise coming from the defeated Buggy. "This is stupid. You haven't got the right to call anything stupid, Big Nose." Slightly smirking at his own statement, Zoro earned a chuckle from both him and Robin, his smirk becoming prouder as he heard the ego snap in the clown behind him. "BB Big." Buggy hardly stuttered out, his nose running slightly as he pathetically reached out to the swordsman in front of him. "Nose." Zoro finished for him, earning another laugh from his crewmate beside him. Faltering from his steps, Buggy leaned against the tunnel's wall, his eyes glaring tirelessly at the swordsman. "You just wait till I tell Straw Hat about this." Raising his eyebrow, Zoro glanced behind, not expecting the clown to mutter out that threat. "Luffy? Why would he care about this?" Cockily smirking towards the swordsman, Buggy's eyes glistened, his posture straightening with each step. Placing both of his hands onto his hips, the clown looked around sarcastically, his eyes still however directed towards Zoro. "Oh, did you say something to me?" Tinting his voice with pride at the words, "me," Buggy slowed down his steps. Glancing over to Robin, Zoro twitched, mumbling under his breath, "He just doesn't learn, does he?" Halting her steps, Robin fully turned towards Buggy, her face expression less. "We were asking what Luffy has got to do with this, sir, Buggy." Chuckling under his breath, Zoro turned towards Robin, his arms crossed over his chest. "Sir, you're not seriously buying up his stupid story, are you, R.O.? I expect you to treat him the same, Swordsman-san. After all, this man in front of us just got accepted into the Shichibukai. It would be rude not to show him some respect." Stumbling back slightly, Zoro's eye widened, his face comically turning around to face Robin. "What?" Hissing his words out under his breath, Zoro's mouth hung slightly agape, robotically turning his head towards Buggy's. "He's a..." "That's right, Roronoa Zoro, it is me, the leader of the pirate dispatch, feared across the lands of the Grand." Bluntly interrupting his proclamation, Robin continued on, ignoring the unbelieving stare penetrating from her crewmate. "So, as you were saying, what has this got to do with our captain?" Lowering his hands from his hips, Buggy glanced questionably at Robin, before nodding slightly. "Me and Straw Hat have history together." Throwing back his putrid smirk, Buggy pointed towards the two, his eyes gleaming with pride. "He owes me after all. If it wasn't for me, Straw Hat wouldn't have probably survived 2 years ago." Feeling the tension in the tunnel grow thin, both Robin and Zoro's lips scowled, their eyes fading slightly. Gritting down on his teeth, Zoro got ready to speak, though Robin hastily beat him to it. "I see. So I'm right to assume that you would consider yourself a friend of Captain San?" Twitching at her words, Zoro sent Robin another curious glare. "Luffy considers nearly everyone his friend. I wouldn't be surprised if he thought of you in the same way minus the time when you tried to decapitate him. Turning back around to continue the walk down the tunnel, he winced his eyes, staying silent. Sweat dropping for a moment as the swordsman mumbled out his concern, Buggy shook his head, turning his attention back to Robin. Teammates is something I would prefer to use. After all, Straw Hat would never become privileged enough to become friends with them. So, Robin once again interrupted, a forced smile tugging on her lips. Seeing as your friends, or as you prefer to say, teammates, don't you think it would be in your favor to help us find Captain Sand's brother? After all, that seems like something a teammate would do. Seeing where his crewmate was going in this, Zoro, HMPH, Ed, smirking slightly. Brought back by her words, Buggy stuttered, slowly looking to the side. I guess. Looking back at the Straw Hat Pirates with his newfound pride, Buggy marched forward, causing Robin to inwardly sigh. We shouldn't be waiting here then, let us go and find Straw Hat's brother right away. Holding out his hand in front of Buggy's chest, Zoro frowned. Halt right there. You might want to look at this first. Eh? Buggy cringed out, his pupils wandering around. Gracefully walking up to the frozen duo, Robin's eyebrow raised slightly. Well, it looks like that might be a way out. This is bad. Ace stated out, his voice echoing out onto the newly built stone wall in front of him. And you say that I point out the obvious things. The voice butted in, though its tone was also wreaked in concern. Twitching at its voice, Ace instantly walked towards the cobbled wall, hitting it with all his strength. Vista Haruta? Can you hear me? Silence echoed the room after his words, causing the two inhabitants to inwardly gulp. Turning around, Ace's pupils darted everywhere, seeing no place to escape from. Gritting his teeth, he worriedly brushed his fingers through his hair, before settling down on the floor below. He started, catching the attention of the voice. Have no luck. You don't say. Lifting his head from his fingers, Ace's eyes were directed towards the voice, his own eyebrow raising. So are you going to tell me? Surprised by the pirate's words, the voice jumped slightly, its hands crossed over each other. What? Sighing, Ace leaned back onto the room's wall, his eyes slightly glazed with tiredness. Who you are, what you are. Catching the full attention of the voice, it stared at him with widened eyes, before instantly turning its head away. It's none of your business. None of my business? Ace immediately replied, his mouth slightly agape. You're a voice in my head that only I can see, not to mention you pushed me off the top of a coliseum. How is that not my business? Frowning slightly, it continued to face away from Ace, a hint of a pout appearing on its lips. It started, quietening Ace from his rant. Just forget about it, the whole, me pushing you off the roof, thing. Barely sounding its words, the figure's voice wobbled, causing Ace to stare at it with surprise. Forget about it? Yeah. The voice instantly replied, its hands falling to its sides. The figure's head turned towards Ace, its eyebrows narrowing. It's not like I wanted to do it, you think I want to be here. I want this to be over already. Nearly screaming out its words, the voice looked close to tears. I never wanted to do any of this shit. If it wasn't for, it started to mumble, losing focus on the conversation itself. Just forget about it, okay? Silence. Blinking slightly, Ace stared wide-eyed at the figure. Wringing his mouth open to say something, the ex-commander's eyes glazed over, his mouth shutting. Onkos have thoughts of its own. Shaking his head, the fire-thrower sighed, I really am losing my mind. Nodding slightly in response to the voice, Ace grew a small frown, though didn't say a thing about it. Bringing his gaze towards the wall behind the voice, his eyes winced slightly. A light. There was a light, and where light was also some sign of life. Bringing himself off the ground, Ace hesitantly walked towards the small light beckoning from a crack in the wall, his hand tracing over the said crack lightly. Get out the way. What? Sighing, Ace looked down towards the voice, his pupils filled with guilt. If you don't get out the way, I'll probably end up accidentally hitting you along with this. And what would it be that you're hitting? Suddenly grinning at the voice's words, Ace looked dangerously towards the wall, clenching his fists together. I found our way out. What? Wait, stop. You know how well that went last time, you idiot, get away from me. Twitching at the now common insult which sounded from the voice, Ace pulled his fists back, ignoring the rest of the voice's words. Lighting up almost instantly, Ace's mouth once again grew into a smirk, his fists easily connecting onto the now crumbling wall in front him, lowering his arm as a path opened up before him. Not realizing the voice was standing a few feet behind him, he was immediately sounded to a gasp of amazement. Turning his head down towards the voice, he chuckled slightly under his breath, surprised to see the figure too astonished by a simple hit. See? Smirking, Ace took a step forward into the newly made path. Told you I would find our way out. I didn't think you'd actually do it. The voice mumbled, its eyes widening as it looked down at the path they had found. Looking back up to Ace, it smirked, once again crossing its hands over its chest. So you're not entirely useless, idiot. Loosing his smirk, Ace twitched, narrowing his eyes. My name is Ace. It's not that hard to pronounce, Brad. Also twitching at its new nickname, the voice glared towards the fire thrower, a pissed-off pout appearing on its lips. I'm not calling you that. Idiot. Letting out a deep sigh, the ex-commander took a step forward, his eyes going glassy all of a sudden. I already told. Yo, as soon as the last word was said, Ace instantly fell to the ground. Silence. Oh oi. The voice suddenly mumbled, its pupils shaking slightly, stumbling over to where Ace fell. The voice dropped down to its knees, slowly bringing its hands over the fire thrower. Hey, what's wrong? Silence. When, Ace, suddenly a soft snore hit the air. Kicking down the door in front of them, Zoro unhesitantly stepped forward, his hands grazing the swords by his side. Quickly checking all around the area the door led to, Zoro glanced behind him with a nod. Isn't there a more gentle way to open a door, Swordsman-san? Robin asked, stepping gracefully over the now shattered door before her. Grunting in response, Zoro edgily brought his hand away from his swords, not sensing anyone in distance. Turning his head back towards his crewmate and the clown, Zoro sighed. Looks like no one's here. Well, Buggy's voice instantly hit the air, causing the swordsman to twitch. Thank you for that input there, Grasshead. Robin sighed at the immaturity of the clown, a frown edging down her lips as she took in the scenery. It wouldn't be an insane idea for any of the trio to still think they were underground, for the only light source came from the gigantic metal goblet placed in the center of the rounded hallway. Golden stone, though properly placed unlike those in the tunnel, bricks were perfectly layered on the walls, giving the hallway a more frightening tone. It looked like this place was looked after, so where was everyone? Suddenly, a crash beckoned from the opposite side of the hallway, catching the attention of the trio. Tripping out of the door frame was a ridiculously dressed chariot girl, a huge feather placed upon her head. Her pupils visibly widened at the sight of the alerted trio, her head tilting slightly. With Zoro, Robin and Buggy frozen in space, it seemed like the heavy silence continued forever, before the girl simply smiled. You must be here to see the tournament, she boldly stated, causing the three to also tilt their heads slightly. Don't worry, skipping over to where they were standing, the girl softly took a hold of Buggy's hand, nudging towards the doorframe she appeared from. I get lost in here all the time as well. I'll let go of M, Buggy stuttered out, looking back towards Zoro and Robin, his eyes gleaming with, help me. Letting out a small chuckle, Robin followed the girl and Buggy, noting for Zoro to join them. Curious, Zoro hesitantly followed the trio, his voice tinted with intrigue. What's this tournament you were talking about? He asked, earning a tired look from Robin. The girl innocently replied, though was immediately cut off by Robin. What my associate was meaning to ask was what is this tournament about? Sending the girl a peaceful smile. Robin giggled slightly, clapping both her hands together. I'm afraid we came here with no idea about it, so I was wondering? Zoro inwardly sighed, looking towards the girl as well for answers. Oh, I see. Opening the door in front of her, the girl stepped forward into yet another hallway, though this time, it was narrow. It's amazing that you haven't heard already. There have been participants coming from all over the Grand Line to win the prize at the tournament here today. What was it again? Halting in her steps, the girl furrowed her eyebrows, before her eyes lit up with recognition. That's right. The Mara Mara no Mi devil fruit that everyone's going crazy about. It's here as a prize for whoever wins the tournament. Continuing in her steps, The girl was unaware of the sudden death glares from the two Straw Hat Pirates, which was now directed at the clown. Biting down on her lip, Robin Bryfly glanced towards Zoro, relieved to see that he too knew what the "Mara Mara no Mi" fruit was. Mumbling under his breath so that only Robin could hear, Zoro sighed. So he was lying? It would seem, though I find it hard to believe why. 'Cause he's a narcissistic idiot, what's more to say? Robin chuckled, before instantly placing her hand over her lips. It's funny to see how affected you are by him, Zoro. Giggling slightly more as Zoro twitched, Robin continued on. Though I think it would be naive of us to not go to this tournament. Raising an eyebrow, Zoro stared at Robin, a confused glaze peering from his eyes. What? I doubt Clown San would think to lie to us like that, especially when he was under threat from you. He's way too in love with himself to put himself in danger. Staring at the door they were now approaching, Robin's lips drew a line, her expression growing dim. So I would like to investigate closer, if you don't mind. Letting out another sigh, Zoro looked to the side, a small breeze hitting all their faces. Looking up, he saw the girl, with buggy still in hand, smile both back at him and Robin, pushing open a door. Just this way. Just as they were stepping out, a huge applause hit the air. Before Zoro could take in the appearance of Irina, Robin once again whispered in his ear. After all, Swordsman-san, what would our captain do if he heard of this as well? Almost instantly, Zoro's pupils grew, suddenly realizing the reason his crewmate wanted to stay. As both of them hesitantly sat down next to the shaking clown, there was only one thing on their minds. That there was no doubt their captain would be in this tournament. Sabo, despite the time we have spent together, there is no way you are going to get me to do that. Koala's voice echoed through the deserted alleyway, a quietened "tch" replying in her words. It's the best way if we want to avoid being discovered by the citizens here. Sabo stated back, his neck leaning against a cobbled wall. Crossing hit, Sabo sighed, quickly glancing up to his colleague that was glaring at him with doubt. Obviously displeased with the response, Koala yanked Sabo's collar upwards, meeting his eyes with warning. The only thing it's going to be doing is getting us killed. I would much prefer disobeying my orders than fighting him. Glaring back at her, Sabo's eyes narrowed. You won't be. I'll be the one fighting in his place. All you've got to do is distract the both of them for enough time for me to trade places. Continuing to stare at the girl with emotionless eyes, the blonde placed his hand over Koala, silently telling her to let go. Letting out a defeated sigh, Koala's expression instantly changed, a smile uttering her lips. Letting go of the blonde's collar, she beamed out an innocent laugh. You owe me then, Sabo. Tinting the last words with threat, the said man gulped, wincing slightly as he received a dangerous yet playful glare from the knife-wielding girl. Standing up from where he was dropped, Sabo quickly dusted himself off, returning his glance over to his companion. So, I'm guessing we're done here? Letting her laugh faint away, Koala let out another sigh. Yup. Popping the P on her words, she grinned towards Sabo, placing her hands over her hips. So until then, I suggest we go and check something out. Not expecting for the other to proclaim this, Sabo raised his eyebrow. Staring at Koala with confusion, Sabo barely managed to stutter out his question, his tone tinted with curiosity. You want to go somewhere? Immediately realizing the look she was receiving, Koala pouted, turning away from the blonde with a huff. Don't act so surprised. Mumbling out the last of her words, Koala's eyes narrowed, her voice becoming hesitant. There's something that we need to check out. Hearing the hesitation in her tone, Sabo immediately straightened his posture, his previous expressions turning serious. Work-related then, I'm guessing. Nodding in response, Koala bit her lip. Though, if it's anything like the rumors are saying is true. Stepping out from the shadowed alleyway, Koala focused her stare towards the looming Colosseum, her pupils glazing over. Then it might be best to abandon this mission than go through with it. Eyes widening at her statement, Sabo instantly rushed over to where she was standing, his posture surprised and shocked from the girl's conclusion. What, now you want to leave? Briefly glancing over to the blonde's eyes, Koala sent Sabo a saddened smile. Of course not, it wouldn't be as interesting if we were to instantly choose the best option. Then what? What's going to happen, Koala? Picking up her feet, Koala took a few steps forward, before peering over her shoulder. The Marines, they're coming. With the air growing thinner, Sabo's pupils grew. Realization of the girl's fears crossing over his own mind. This whole competition is a trap set by the Marines. They're coming for Luffy, when in a time of questioning. People start to wonder about their deepest regrets. Why do they do this, you ask? Because it is the only thing keeping them human. And not into something that ceases to feel. Marco would be lying to say he hadn't felt this powerful in a long time. Unlike the past couple of years, he had found a reason to fight. Of course, the time spent as the 2 years passed hadn't been wasted. He could even remember times where he had regained meaning, seeing his brothers recovering and smiling once more. Heck, even he had times where he smiled and moved on from the war, enjoying his time alive. But the memories always bit back, and when they did, it hurt. Staring at the white-clothed dressed man and his accomplice with a slight frown, Marco closed his eyes. Feeling their steps suddenly start to pound their way towards him, Marco effortlessly brought up his leg, swerving to the side gracefully and meeting his heel with the other's sword. Flinging the said weapon out of the white-clothed man's hand, he brought his arm up, sending a confident punch towards his face and into his accomplice. Hearing the cheers of the crowd heighten, Marco regained his posture, looking for the next attacker. "You're here with Straw Hat, aren't you?" a blonde, scarred man declared from behind, causing Marco to turn and stare with annoyance. Straw Hat. Ace's brother, the one he was going to fight. The one that he fought alongside with at Marineford. Marineford. Damn the memories. Twitching at the name, Marco casually sighed, putting both hands inside his pockets. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I saw you two talking, making some alliance, I'm guessing." "Alliance?" Giving out a small chuckle, Marco swiftly shook his head, a slight smirk on his lips. Quite the opposite, actually. Quickly, however, the smirk was gone, for the scarred blonde instantly attacked, his legs turning into springs and aiming towards the phoenix's head. Seeing this attack come from the very beginning, Marco lifted his left hand up from his pocket, catching the man's foot immediately. Surprising the other blonde, he instantly reverted his other foot towards Marco's stomach, lightly touching it, before it was once again caught, this time by the other hand. "Let go, you bastard," the scarred blonde yelled, struggling to get out of the captain's grip. Letting out a final sigh before he knocked the scarred man out, Marco was stopped, his eyes widening at the sound of someone else yelling. "Come on, Bellamy. You can do it." Hearing the Colosseum go eerily silent, all eyes perched onto the one supporter of the losing blonde. All eyes fell on a fellow contestant, suspiciously looking like an old man done up in a gladiator costume. A sight which Marco had already seen twice. Letting out a small smile, Marco continued with his sigh, glancing back towards his opponent with guilt. Seeing the scarred blonde look astonished and embarrassed by the old man, the phoenix gradually let go of the grip on his left hand. "Looks like you've got a fan, Bellamy." Anger instantly seeking out of the now hobbling blonde, Bellamy turned red, raising up his fist again. Shut up." Returning his lips to a straightened line, Marco let his hand fall, his eyes closing gracefully. "I'm sorry." Seeing Bellamy look questionably towards him, Marco clenched his fists together. Instantly disappearing from the scarred blonde's sight, Marco reappeared behind him, throwing his fist backwards and straight towards the center of the scarred man's head. Surprising both the audience and the fellow competitors, Bellamy fell to the floor immediately, knocked out and unconscious. "I'm sorry." Once again the Colosseum grew silent, no cheers erupting from the crowds. Taking this as a chance to attack, a ridiculously dressed boxer aimed for a blind spot in Marco's attacking range, his smile widening as he saw Marco stay in his spot. Raising his fist to the height of his crown, the boxer gritted his teeth, letting out a yell. "King's punch." Seconds away from hitting his target, the said target turned around, instantly placing his leg vertically in the air, a small blue flame flickering off the edge of it. Not saying a word, Marco swung his foot into the boxer's face, sending him flying into the opposite direction, crashing into the crowds above. "I'm sorry. Pathetic, you're not even using your devil fruit to the best of its abilities." A proud tall man with wavy blue hair proclaimed, slowly grabbing the attention of the phoenix. Staring at the tall blankly, Marco looked to the side, ignoring the man and counting the contestants that were left. 6. There were 6 left. Watching as a kimono-dressed fish man fell to the ground, Marco let out a sigh. Make that 5 left. Are you listening to me, Phoenix? Spilling his words with sarcasm, the blue-haired man frowned, placing his hands on his hips. Glancing once more to the man, Marco shrugged, letting up his hands into the air. Twitching at the blonde's actions, the tall one pounced, aiming his truly heightened legs towards Marco's face with anger. Twisting his arms instantly, Marco swiftly threw the tall to the ground, brushing off his hands with a glazed look in his eyes. I'm sorry. Damn you. The blue-haired man uttered before closing his eyes. I'm sorry. Gritting both his teeth and fingers together, Marco looked towards the remaining competitors, though his mind was clouded. I'm sorry. The whisper was small, but it wasn't unheard. For what? The phoenix replied, his eyes still perched onto the other. Grumbling countless words under his breath, the man sighed, flinging his hands over the wooden rail and closing his eyes. I don't understand. I'm nobody to you. Why should you even care about a stranger like me? You're whining, was all the phoenix replied, causing the man to smirk slightly. Taking a place next to him, Marco let out a deep breath, watching as the air evaporated before him and turned into a misty fog. Hearing the cheery music bounce behind, the phoenix returned his stare towards the other. You know what I mean though? Raising his eyebrow, Marco glanced to the other. I have no idea what you're talking about, Ace. Though it's something I would expect seeing as you just drunk a whole ship's worth of sake. Now, I can't get drunk, remember, Ace let out with a small hiccup, causing the blonde to let out a defeated sigh. Oh, really? How's that? Straightening his posture, the fire thrower grinned, flinging his finger in front of Marco's face. Science. Marco stared at Ace blankly, unsure of how to respond. Glancing at the man's face, Marco let out a bawling laugh, holding onto the edge of the ship tightly as the freckled man stared at him confusedly. That would only apply if you had one drink, Ace, not A. But I wasn't kidding. Ace's voice went serious again, his lips frowning and his eyes narrowing. About what I said before, I just don't understand. Of course you don't, you're an idiot. Marco swiftly replied, earning a surprised and widened look on his brother's face. I didn't know you were capable of insulting someone. Smirking, Marco looked up to the sky once more, a satisfied smile placed on his lips. And I didn't know how blind you could be. Seeing no recognition of understanding on the fire thrower's face, Marco let out a sigh. You're our brother, Ace. Not a stranger, but our brother. You have to be stupid to think that we wouldn't care about you. K. Furrowing his eyebrows, Marco instantly spotted the glassy look in the freckled man's eyes, immediately catching him in his arms and letting out yet another sigh. Damn it. Giving out one last peaceful smile, the phoenix peered down to his sleeping brother, before running away from drunk Haruta and Thatch, who also wanted to be a part of the group hug. I'll be the one to win the Mara no mi fruit, you bastards, come and try me. It hurt. It hurt more than Marco would have ever expected it to feel. Seeing those he was going to try to move on. That is, right after he wins back Ace's fruit. He's here, you know. Just like you said he would be. The figure smirked proudly, whipping his hands up into the air. Well, of course he is. Were you expecting anything less from me? Hearing a complied, tut, 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 from the transponder snail, the figure's smirk faltered. It has worked all too well though. The captain of the new Whitebeard pirates is here as well now. And, don't tell me the Marines are getting scared now, are they? The figure asked questionably, flicking his hand at a nearby servant. The transponder snail instantly twitched, its eyes narrowing into a glare. Don't speak to me in such a manner, pirate. You might be one of the warlords, but that doesn't mean you are any higher than the S we're hunting down today. Laughing, the figure whipped his feet around to a nearby chair, resting them swiftly. Oh really? I wouldn't be saying that to someone who currently has both Straw Hat Luffy and the Phoenix in their hands now, should you? Once again, the transponder snail twitched, its eyes widening before a forced sigh echoed through the speaker. And that is the problem. Are you sure that the Whitebeard captain won't interfere with our plan? That's something I already have dealt with. The phoenix is too concerned right now with winning Portga's devil fruit. As soon as he gets that, I'll assure you he'll be out of the way. The snail gave a nod, before its head tilted slightly, and that raises a question. Should we really give away a prized fruit like that to someone like him? I doubt the officials at headquarters will be pleased to find out that you let the Whitebeard captain have the fruit. The figure simply chuffed, looking towards his nails with disinterest, but that won't be happening. What? A startled voice echoed from the snail, its actions timid. You don't expect us to take down him as well? Letting out a growl, the figure picked up the transponder snail, a frown perched on his lips. Do you not listen to me? I'm telling you, the fruit that is being given away today is simply a model. A fake of the actual Mara Mara no Mi fruit. Licking his lips, the figure placed the transponder snail back down, lifting his knees up and spreading his legs out. Despite how much we looked, I couldn't find the real damn fruit. Looks like someone might have snatched it already. A deep sigh sounded out of the speaker, before a nod came from the snail. I see, that might work. Oh, it will. Shrieking out a bellowing laugh, the figure eagerly watched the screen placed a few meters away from him, his smirk deepening. My fleet is already making its way over, and remember Doflamingo, if anything goes wrong here, you'll be stripped of your title like you were supposed to, and will be hunted down despite your history with us. Grabbing a hold of the speaker edgily, Doflamingo smirked. I'll be waiting. Dropping the speaker out of his hand, the feathered man leaned back onto his throne, his eyes gradually making its way from the knocked-out Trafalgar Law over to the moving screen, his eyes narrowing. Brushing his hand over the wooden box seated on his lap, the blonde smirked. Let the real game begin. How did you find out about this, Koala? Skipping onto the next stone in the street, the said person halted, turning around and forming a pout on her lips. Find out about what? Sending her a serious look, Sabo frowned, his companion's words still repeating in his mind. About the Marines coming. It must have something to do with the Shichibukai who owns this place re-announcing his title, right? Koala mumbled, pouting out her bottom lip more. Winking at the blonde, she stuck her tongue out, before continuing to jump to each stone in the cobbled street. You know Sabo, she started, wobbling on one foot. You can be real dumb when you want to be. Twitching, Sabo looked sheepishly to the side, his eyebrows furrowing. So I'm wrong? Kinda. More like you're just scratching the truth. Koala simply stated, hopping once more. I got the information off one of Doflamingo's evil trenchmen. Must have been a higher up cuz he sure did know a lot. Strong too. Strong? Sabo mimicked, his pupils widening slightly. Tripping over, Koala collapsed onto the ground, before brushing herself off the floor and facing Sabo with a gruff. Yep, strong. Flinging her head back to view the sky, the hatted girl started taking steps backward, her arms swinging with the wind. Took a long time for him to willingly tell me what he knew. Kept going on about how he was going to kill me and such. I was able to get out of him that the competition at the Colosseum was all a trick, something to lead Straw your brother to them. Halting, Koala once again looked to Sabo, a slight frown etching her lips. But because I had to find my partner who was off flirting with a pirate, I was unable to get all the specifics on when or where the Marines are going to show up. The rest I can easily presume due to the small minds the Marines put in charge of these tasks, but thanks to evil henchmen, we'll have the upper hand. Readjusting his gloves, the blonde narrowed his eyes, before shaking his head. You know what, I was about to inquire on how you got him to tell you this much, but then I remembered. I don't want to know. Tapping her forehead, Koala sent Sabo an innocent smile, before turning her back and running down the street. Nope, you don't. Last time you asked that, you had nightmares for weeks. Growling slightly under his breath, the blonde ran after the girl with a scowl, his face scrunched. I was 13. You can't tell a 13-year-old stuff like that before you go on a mission. Once again Sabo, Koala muttered, halting at the edge of the dock. Excuses. Catching up to where his partner stood, Sabo breathed out heavily, before turning to face his companion, expecting to see a childish smirk on her face. Instead, however, he got a stern one. Her eyes simply looking out to the water in front. Looking to where she seemed to be scanning. The air around Sabo grew thin, stepping back slightly. They're here already? He yelled out, catching some worried glances from the fishermen around. Yup. Looks like it. Koala whistled, looking towards a chiming town clock placed on the building behind. It looks like they're late though. Whipping his head around to face Koala, Sabo blinked. Late? Dusting her hands off, Koala smirked, turning around on her heels and walking back down the main street that lay ahead of them. If they wanted to skip the main fight, they should have arrived 14.5 minutes ago. Not that I'm complaining though, means it's even more predictable than I had previously assumed. Sighing, Sabo quickly joined the side of the girl, stretching out his arms with a yawn. And do you mind sharing some more of these predictable situations with me? Sending Sabo an all-serious stare, Koala raised an eyebrow. And what would be the fun in that? Of course. The blonde muttered, his eyebrows furrowing together. Blinking, Sabo quickly lifted his head, peering down at Koala with curiosity. About before, on the roof. What were you going to say before I interrupted you? Exactly, did no one teach you manners on how not to interrupt someone when you were a child? Koala chuckled out, teasing the blonde with another smirk. Thinking back to the manners he was taught, Sabo inwardly shivered, returning his gaze to Koala's. Stop avoiding the question. Ah, but I didn't avoid it. My avoidingness obviously answers your question quite well. You know what? I never should have taught you that trick. Sabo replied, letting out a deep breath. So you're not going to tell me? Feeling the air go thin once more, Koala suddenly went silent, her words softer than normal. I'm not that cruel, Sabo. I'm not telling you something like that until I know for sure. Raising his eyebrow, Sabo stared wide-eyed at Koala, his steps faltering and stumbling back. Light now something? Oh God, the world is ending. Biting down on her lip, Koala continued to walk forward, her face shadowed. Hearing the sudden cheers echo from a building ahead, Koala's steps sped up, leaving behind Sabo to run up to her. Hey Sabo. Koala muttered, reaching their destination. Hearing the out-of-breath blonde bawl out all his oxygen beside her, Koala continued on, her face tinted slightly with worry. You know how you said you were asking for help from the Whitebeard pirate? Holding his palms onto his knees, the blonde shook his top hat off, before raising his head. What about it? You heard me before, didn't you? She started, picking up his top hat off the floor. About the tournament being a trap. Narrowing his eyes before placing his hand on the hat, Sabo looked up towards the Colosseum before them. Yes, I do. But what has that got to do with Haru? His pupils instantly shrank, a more hurried tone approaching his posture as he stared at the building with hesitation. Damn it, if she goes in there, then. As I thought. You asked her to assist us, didn't you? Sheepishly looking to the side once more, the blonde inwardly gulped, his feet lifting up and pacing themselves towards the entrance. Great. Looks like we've got to get her out as well. Koala mumbled, throwing her hands up into the air with a huff. But are you sure you want to go through with this? The likeliness that we're going to get killed is way too close to the 100 number for just a hunch. Looking over his shoulder, Sabo edgily placed the hat on his head, his eyes distant. Yes, I'm sure. Are you with me? Grinning, Koala let out a small laugh, before skipping over to where her partner stood. Of course.